we're on to video number 3 for today, and I want to say that the video shouldn't be a substitute for the other coursework. These are supposed to enhance or supplement it. So, beginning where we left off, I want to draw your attention to the notion of outcomes, or the you should be able to's. You will find these statements on the Rampolla sheet. Sometimes I have them in the chapters. In particular, for this week, there's a statement that says you should be able to define primary, secondary, and tertiary sources and state their uses as well as hazards. So this is telling you that this is something important that you should be able to do after you read the chapter. And I can guarantee you that when we have an exam, I take these you should be able to statements and I draw from them. They're more complex than this, but I draw from them for our exams. So they do have value. The last thing I want to talk with you about today is sources. And we're going to start with primary sources. So primary sources have a direct connection to the topic or the event. Sometimes they're called first-hand accounts. They can be letters or images or other physical evidence. But do you think that primary sources are the most reliable sources? So if you said yes, they are a reliable reflection of one person's experience or one person's perception, but they're not necessarily the most reliable because different people will have different accounts. So we find that we get the most reliable information from primary sources when we collect more than one. So primary sources are as much a reflection of the person as they are the event. They're one piece of the mystery, and before you can begin to draw conclusions, you need a lot more pieces. So you need a lot more primary sources and maybe some secondary sources too. A secondary source is created by someone who didn't experience the event. They're usually books or articles. But secondary sources can be broken down into two different kinds. The first is scholarly secondary sources. These are written by scholars. Scholars interpret and analyze primary sources. Now, you should be making a connection back to some of those historical analysis terms that we were talking about earlier. Scholars interpret and analyze primary sources. They are scholarly secondary sources, are generally peer-reviewed, and they're written for other scholars, so the audience matters. I would say that scholarly secondary sources are the most reliable sources. There is a time when scholars write for a general audience, and when that happens, so if a scholar is writing for the New York Times or the Washington Post, then even though it's a scholar writing, it's still a popular source. The last kind of source that we're going to cover is tertiary sources. Tertiary sources are really they're a brief synthesis. So they don't analyze, they don't interpret. They're things like textbooks and encyclopedias, and they summarize a topic or an event. They lack a direct connection to that analytical piece. There's no interpretation of primary sources. So tertiary sources are really good for becoming familiar or acquainted with a topic before you develop a deeper understanding. When you are trying to decide what kind of source you want to use, there are a few things you might want to take into consideration, and one of them is to what degree do you need scholarly information, or are you just becoming familiar with the topic? Some journalists, some professional writers write really good histories, but you are taking a risk in choosing to rely upon a popular source and not a scholarly source. You can do some independent research to determine how much training the historian, how much training a journalist has, and if they have a good reputation. And those are some cues that will help you gain trust in popular sources. So, all right, folks, if you have more questions for me, send me an email. I'll respond to them briefly, but I'll try to capture the information in these video summaries. It took 3 videos to get through our summary for today. So be kind and look for compassion in the world, because we need a lot more.